We're doing it live, folks. Welcome, everybody. Aaron, you're still
Hello,
there.
hello, hello.
Welcome. Thank you all for being here this evening. John, Nancy, Harley, Diane, Brittany, Nat, Rachel, Connie. So good to see everybody. Thanks for coming out this evening. We got some more folks making their way in, so we'll get started in just a few moments. Talking this evening about seeing wider, navigation, sky reading, predicting the weather, how to increase our awareness while we're out in the backcountry. It's going to be great. Thank you for coming out.
I love seeing so many people here again that were here from the last two. This is awesome. It means we're not ruining it. So that's good.
Not boring you to tears just yet. There's always something new to learn outside. Come on. Awesome. Well, while you're all in here, before we get started, we'll just go over a couple of housekeeping notes. So you've all been muted, and we ask that you please keep it that way for the duration of the meeting. We will have an opportunity at the end to field some questions, in which case you are free to unmute, ask your question. While the workshop's happening, Aaron will be fielding any questions that might come up in the chat, so feel free to throw them in the chat, and he will do his best to answer them, or if somebody else has an answer, by all means, to have the conversation there. A heads up that we are recording this meeting, so if you don't feel comfortable with your face, camera, screen, whatever being recorded, please do turn off your camera and you won't be in the recording. Simple as that. I think that's it. Any other points you had on there, Aaron?
No.
Great.
I would like to point out the new microphone. Someone commented last time that the audio wasn't great and we should get a new microphone for better quality. So we did. Enjoy.
The microphone, I don't have one, but
yeah, so enjoy the 3 seconds of my voice, of my quality audio. That's all. Go right ahead.
Seems like everyone, yeah, we'll get started. So our talk tonight, seeing wider, navigation, sky reading, some ideas around predicting weather, and basically how we can really increase our awareness capacity while we're out in the wild, in nature, or wherever we are. Actually, one last note I will put there as far as housekeeping. If you would like to see both me talking and the share screen, there's an option at the top of the screen. If you hover up, there is a click button there called View Options. And if you hit View Options, there'll be a drop-down menu, and you can hit side-by-side view, and that'll give you both the share screen and me talking. So if you'd like that, by all means. But if the share screen alone is working for you perfectly, then that is great by us. So seeing wider, navigation, sky reading, awareness skills, predicting a bit of weather. Before we get started, we'll just go over what we're going to cover this evening. So we're going to talk a bit about some basic backcountry navigation, talk about predicting weather, and we're going to take sort of a semi-surface dive into everything, look at some different cloud types, what they tell us, and then take a bit of a deeper dive into what it's like to actually see the landscape with this broadened scope, what's often referred to as owl eyes, and what that offers us in the space of awareness overall. Before we get into it, though, we'll just, there we are, give you a quick note on who we are. The Trip Shed, Aaron and I are brothers. We founded the Trip Shed a few years ago and have both been working as backcountry guides for about 12 years now. So collectively, about 25 years of experience between us. We are an experience-first outdoor store, so we do online retail sales of camping gear that we believe in, as well as crafting, curating, and offering some really empowering, impactful outdoor experiences that typically take place on a backcountry canoe trip. We love it. It's great. It's a lot of fun. Aaron, if you have anything else to add in there, please do.
You're good.
Rock and roll. First things first, we'll get into around backcountry navigation is how not to get lost. That is the first tip of staying on the route, is don't get lost. How don't you get lost? Luckily, most areas that you're going to cover if you're going on a backcountry trip are typically well maintained, they're well organized, and 9 times out of 10, if you're planning a backcountry trip, you have some semblance of where you're going. You're going to be traveling on standard routes, and there are ways to enhance that, obviously, looking out for trail markers, following established routes, making sure that, you know, if you do get lost prior to the trip, you leave a trip report with somebody. There are some of these tactics that kind of just cushion the impact of potentially losing your way in the backcountry. But, you know, staying on those routes, if you are taking a walk off of a predestined route, making sure that you have your bearings and, sorry, somebody else is coming in here. And are bringing a map and compass with you. Some of the key essentials. Some folks like to bring a GPS as well. Those are great too. So what things might actually make you lost? Well, on trails, you know, things like snow covering the trails that might make it harder to see. Things like fallen trees. Things that break the consistency of a backcountry trail. Oftentimes, if you're at a junction where multiple trails meet, it might be kind of hard to see depending on the time of year, depending on the usual landmarks that you're able to recognize. They might shift, especially if it's in a pretty deep backcountry space that's not well maintained all the time. Something might come up that shifts the quality of the trail, making it a bit harder to navigate. What else might make you lost? Obviously, wandering too far off the trail without keeping track of where you're going. So if you are going to go for this long hike off a trail to go explore some, whatever, off the beaten path spots, making sure that you're tracking where you're going, whether it's leaving bits and signs, whether it's tracking on your map, but not doing something that, excuse me there, not doing anything that you don't have thought around, that you don't have a level of awareness around. The biggest thing, though, that will get you lost in the backcountry, obviously, is not knowing what you're doing. On any backcountry trip that you're going to go on, if you are unfamiliar with the basics of navigation, your chances of losing your way are much higher. So the first and foremost suggestion there is, if you're going into a situation where there is an opportunity to get lost, to make sure that you understand the basics of navigation. So this workshop might give you a snippet, but there are other resources available. There are whole courses dedicated just to navigation that are great to take. Go with a friend who knows it, but easier way into spaces that bring with them a natural air of travel risk as far as of navigation. And again, when people get lost, the actual thing that pushes that lostness that far is being unprepared as far as, like we said, prep going in. But coming back to this thing of giving your friends a trip report, letting people know where you're going, letting even local authorities or the park know, like really being tight with cushioning the potential for things to kind of go awry.
I will add one quick point there. If you are traveling in an Ontario park, they will ask when you're registering what color your tents and your canoes are. So that's always a great way for them to find you. And of course, they'll typically have your route plan as well, but it's always a really, really good practice, especially if you're doing Crown Land camping, where there's no registration or reservation system, to always leave that trip report and trip plan behind with somebody who knows and knows when to expect you back.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just checked the chat there quickly, and somebody mentioned the cairn. For sure, there are these little markers that you can begin to notice. They might be particular to a trail. Some trails folks might have already seen the cairns and added their own. Maybe it's a piece of trail tape or a notch in a tree. But being aware of these things as you're starting, so you can keep looking for them as you go along. Maybe it's a splash of blue paint on a tree, who knows? But keeping your wits about you at the beginning, so that when you're deeper in and there's a higher risk of getting lost, that you know what to look for. So you're walking down the trail and it's awesome, and you make a right and it was supposed to be a left, you make a left and it's supposed to be a right. Now what do? You've gotten yourself lost. First things first, number one is you slow down. You pay attention. And again, that is the biggest thing that will get folks lost, is not having an awareness of where they're heading. If you're not checking your map, if you're not paying attention to these things, now you found yourself in a position where you kind of don't know where you're at. Welcome some new folks into the room there. So once you're lost, you've realized that you don't know where you are, you're looking around, you have no idea where the trail is, you thought that tree was that tree and that tree was that tree, and you kind of stuck. Oftentimes our bodies want to go immediately into panic and shock, and that makes sense because that is our human response to a space of uncertainty. But when you're lost, that is the one thing that will keep you lost. If all of a sudden, you don't know where you are and you start freaking out and panicking, you start running around wildly, that's just going to worsen your situation. You're going to burn energy, and depending on how lost you are, you might be out there for a day or two. And so often the thing that we need to do is to stay put. Once you've stayed put, you've caught your breath, maybe you've had a snack to kind of level yourself out a bit, take some time. Take a bit of a walk around in a localized area and see if you can't find the right way. If you realized you were lost not long after you were on the trail, chances are the trail is not far off. And if you haven't gone for your big runaround because you were freaking out and you stayed put, you might be able to just find the trail by doing a quick walk. So again, keeping those landmarks, keeping that awareness of where you're heading, but just doing a little stroll around to double check where you're at. Welcome, Stephanie. Once you've stopped, once you've done a little walk around, check your map and rationalize. So often in these positions, the thing that gets thrown out right away in that panic space is rational thinking, especially if you've been traveling all day, especially if you're maybe dehydrated or hungry. Our ability to think rationally about what to do next is the first thing to go, and that's the first thing that will keep you back on the track to get found. That whole rational thinking thing also comes to with actually acknowledging that we're lost. If we're lost, if we don't know where we are, the thing that can get us into trouble sometimes can be actually our own arrogance, you might call it, of not believing that we're lost and not acknowledging the fact that we actually don't know where we are. It's like, no, I'm sure I know where we are. We're just got to go around that way. And if you can't be honest with yourself or with the folks around you that you actually don't know where you are, you might dig the hole a bit deeper and get a bit more lost. So acknowledge, yeah, okay, maybe I don't recognize that tree. Maybe we did see the trail last about an hour ago. And those two things, rational thinking and clear decision-making, are the two biggest things that will get you back on track. If you are lost and if you are staying put, that is like one of the best things you can do is to stay put, because if you've taken those steps prior to let folks know where you're going, let them know when you were supposed to be back, they're going to come looking for you when you don't match that time. So you can stay put. If it's kind of in the evening, depending on what time of day it is, set up some way to be comfortable. If you have your tent with you, set up a tent, have a meal, lay out some brightly colored clothing around the area. If it's during the day, light some green shrubbery, some leaves, some branches to try and make a lot of smoke. If it's night, burn some really dry wood to really make a bright fire, and just keep yourself as visible as you can. If you've got a whistle with you, 3 short blasts is the common distress signal whistle. So just hang out, wait it out, and make yourself as aware and visible as possible. If you are in a situation where maybe first aid or who knows that you have to move out, head towards, if you have the map, where you think a road would be. Chances are a road will lead to people. People will lead to you getting back to safety. If you can't find a road on your map, head towards a body of water or a river and follow that down. Chances are the river will likely cross at some point with a road. So some things to keep in mind, and like if you do these things and you take care, 9 times out of 10 you'll probably be found. And if you can do that with the space of rational thinking, chances are you'll be found in a bit better state than if you were running around and increasing your chance of injury and who knows what might else happen. So that's a bit of a quick note there on what to do when you're lost and how not to get lost. One of the obvious tips in not getting lost is having a basic understanding of how to use a map and compass. So we'll go over some map basics here. Map basics, two types. There are probably several more, but the two often most seen types of maps: standard versus topographic maps. Standard maps are ones without the topographic lines, and they typically just denote bodies of water, bodies of land, and trail lines. These will often be ones that you get at the beginning of trail hikes, sort of those little paper ones slipped into the trail stand there. And then you have topographic maps. And topographic maps have something called contour lines. Now, contour lines are lines that indicate level of incline and decline on a landscape. So for quick reference, the closer together the contour lines are, the steeper the incline is. The further apart they are, the more gradual that incline is. And this is really useful when you're reading features of the landscape to help plot your route and understand what you'll be traveling in. And again, things to consider when you're traveling is so you don't get lost is that if all of a sudden you check your map where you're walking and you're supposed to be walking down a valley, so down a trail that has these really, really tightly packed contour lines indicating a steep valley, if all of a sudden you're walking up an area that feels like a gradual incline, chances are you're in the wrong spot. So checking those lines and relating them to the landscape that you're walking on is going to keep you more close to the right way of moving. Basic compass use. First things first is understanding your map when you're using a compass. So maps are all different. Again, I gave two here, but typically they'll have standard things on each map like the legend. And the legend will include the trail markers, distance between different trail points, those contour intervals, and it might actually say how much distance between contour lines is. Maybe one is 100 meters, maybe one is a mile, who knows. Your compass will also have on it, so then on the map itself, you'll have lines on the map that indicate true north and true south, and lines on your compass on the back behind the bezel that will indicate true north and true south that you should align with the map itself. So on the map or on the compass, you've got 3 or 4 key pieces. You have your needle, that little red line, which always points towards true north. You've got your dial or bezel, and your dial is the sort of thing that spins on top of the compass that indicates the different directions, the degree lines, and on the back of the dial, you'll have the straight orientation lines that when using it with a map, you want to line up with the north-south lines on the map itself. And the direction arrow on top of the compass itself is the way you'll walk after you've taken your bearing. Now, taking your bearing on a map is a pretty straightforward process, but something to consider as well. Thankfully, in North America, we don't have to consider it too often, especially when you're traveling short distances, is this idea of declination. And declination is the difference between true north, which is like where the North Pole is, and magnetic north, which can sometimes be a bit different. So your map, again, will have these grid lines on it that point to true north, where the North Pole is. And that won't always match the layout of the map. But your compass needle will always point to magnetic north. So if you're traveling a long distance, you're going to want to correct for that difference in where north is, so your bearing is always as exact as it can be. So the degree to which the magnetic north is different than true north depends on where you are. Again, North America, typically where we're traveling in these parks, it's not going to be huge. And if you're traveling short distances, it's not going to be the biggest issue. When you're traveling long distances, though, it's important to correct for this so you don't end up a long way off the initial trail. And how we can do this using those trail lines is you line up your compass on the trail lines, and basically as you take your bearing on the map and notice, so I'm just checking the chat there. Yeah, as you find yourself on the map and you orient your compass on the map itself, with direction, you'll see that the lines of north itself are a bit different than those north-south lines on the map itself. So you're going to want to adjust that a little bit on your dial so that that north is in line with the direction of travel versus the true north, like that polar cap north.
Alexander, sorry, not to interrupt, but I wonder if perhaps it would be useful for people if we can actually pull up a map. I don't know if I have screen sharing capabilities here.
Throw it to you real quick. That's a great idea, though.
but it might be useful just to see what those contour lines actually look like, so folks can have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So let me know once I've got it. Host disabled participant screen sharing. I am the
Yeah, you should be able to
co-host.
there.
Sweet, great. Let me know if everybody can see my screen. You see it? Yeah, thumbs up. Sweet.
Yep.
Cool. So this is a map of Killarney. This is a really great map. This is a map called Unlostify by Jeff from Jeff's Maps. If you guys are familiar with Jeff from Jeff's Maps, he's one of the great modern day cartographers. Don't buy Jeff's map anymore though, because you won't get a map if you buy it from Jeff's map. They are available online somewhere, but this is Unlostify, which is his new company. He is freaking awesome, Oliver. You're right. Incredible, incredible maps. Anyways, so what you're looking at here is just a quick overview of Killarney Provincial Park. But let's go ahead and take a quick look at one day he will make a trail. We'll take a quick look at a trail over here and understand what contour lines means. So I will have reference to it in 2 points, if that's okay. One when you're traveling on a lake, and one when you're on a portage. So I am slinging. Yeah, there we go. And we don't even sell Unlostify maps. We sell Chrismar maps, which are awesome also, but I am definitely promoting these ones. Okay, so what you're seeing here. So let me quickly talk about lake navigation versus trail navigation. I can't zoom in too much, but when you pull up your own map, you'll be able to tell. So imagine yourself on this lake over here. Let's call this by this point here. This triangle, by the way, is a campsite for those who are unaware. You're looking at the lake, and you're looking at this section over here, for example, and you see how the contour lines are fairly distant from one another. And you're also looking at this section over here, and you see that the contour lines are very, very close. What that tells you is that this shore over here on your left, if you're
Aaron, is
facing
there a way you can zoom in and all anymore? I don't know if other folks are having this, but it's a little bit pain to see the contour. There we go.
Yeah, not without losing quality, but I'll use this. So this section over here, like I said, the contour lines are super close. This not so much. So this is a steep area. It might even be a cliff. It's likely a cliff, likely a sheer cliff on that side of the lake, while this is a bit more of a gradual slope upwards to the tree line. Why is that important? Well, if you are staring down the lake over here and you're wondering, well, am I looking down the lake straight down this way, or maybe I'm looking into this bay? I'm not quite sure. If you can identify where on the map these contour lines are very close and where there's likely a very steep incline, odds are you'll be able to identify that on the map right away. We typically don't use compasses when we're navigating on trips for this very reason, right? The ability to navigate via contour lines is incredibly useful and helpful, and something that you can do in an instant. You don't really have to dive too deep or utilize a compass. A compass is great if you need to second guess or check where you're at, but this is a really useful way of doing that. You can pull up just about any map. Chrismar, Unlostify are two of the big ones. And they will all have contour lines. The other place where contour lines are super important, and it's not listed here as in detail as it is on Jeff's Maps, but is on the portages, right? So if I see on this particular portage itself, if I see that this portage has a number of contour lines very close to one another at the very beginning, it's probably pretty safe to say that the beginning of that portage is going to be very, very steep. You can kind of read it as time goes on, and perhaps it'll flatten out at some point in the middle. You can see other points on the portage where it'll get steep again. You can follow those contour lines the same way that you had for anything else and read the portage as well as you will read a lake itself. It's also a good way to know where you are in a portage. right? Sometimes, I mean, portages aren't marked where they have encouraging signs saying you're halfway through, you're almost there, you're going to make it. But you can identify where you are based on lakes, based on river crossings, and based on the terrain that you're crossing and how steep certain areas of it are. Um, Unlostify has this neat little system here as well, where they use these like time blocks to identify the length of time based on your speed. They also do it for paddling routes. Dig into it; it's interesting. We don't need to dive into it right now necessarily, but that's I think a useful visual tool in being able to read this particular map and identify the direction you're headed just based off of contour. Any questions on that while I've got the map up that I can dig into a bit more? Cool. Well, if there are, we can pull it back up anytime we like. Otherwise, Alexander, I can hand it back over to you.
Rock and roll. Thank you. I'll just throw this back up there. Alrighty. Where are we? Yeah, the final piece I'll say on navigation.
If you're talking, Alexander, you're muted.
Am I muted? Am I unmuted now?
Maybe it's just me.
You're okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, the last thing I'll just say around navigation is orientation. So a lot of the things that we do at TripShed and a lot of the talks that we often have are around backcountry canoe tripping. Now, the thing that's when I guide trips, typically I don't actually use a compass very often. I use the map, depending on the size of lake. Obviously, and Gary mentioned in the fog, there are certain situations where a compass comes super in handy. But while I'm traveling on the lake, I'm considering a few things and I'm taking those into account and checking them as I move. First things first is the land features. So I take a look at my map, I take a look at the lake, and I see what I've got in front of me. You know, I know on the map where I'm coming out of the portage or the access point onto the lake. So I kind of know where I'm starting from. And I'll shift the map so that as I'm looking at it on the back, as I'm looking right down on it and it's on my lap or on the ground of the canoe, I'm going to be sort of paddling in a straight line, sort of where I start. I don't know if you can kind of see there, but it doesn't actually help if I took my hand all backwards and show you this way. But as I'm moving, I'm orienting myself as I'm looking at the map as to what direction I'm moving onto the lake. And then I'm looking at features. So things like islands on the lake, things like, you know, shapes of the shoreline. Again, certain islands are bigger than others. Some islands are so small that they don't actually show up on the map. So taking these things into account and really taking a time to take a look at my map and see what the layout is, and then comparing that to the lake that I'm actually looking at in front of me. And using these landmarks like the islands. Another thing that I use often are campsites and other portages. So if my map has campsites listed off, has the portages listed off, then I'll use those as points of reference. So if I think I'm around a certain bend and I see the site on the map and in real life there, then great, I know where I'm at and I'll continue on. Chances are, and this is like the last thing I'll say to this, you know, if you're in a park that's well maintained, that people travel, something like Algonquin Park or Killarney, you know, there's always the worst case scenario that, you know the portage is on a certain shoreline, you can't see it, head to the shoreline and paddle along it and you'll hit it eventually. They're kind of foolproof ways of navigation. Obviously things, I'll tell you one story. Years ago, Aaron and I were paddling a lake in Algonquin Park called Lake of Two Rivers, aptly named for the two rivers that come off it. And this was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. And we hit some of the worst weather I've seen in the park to date. Water up into our boat just from the waves, pouring rain, lightning, thunderstorm. We were getting off the water. And in this like disoriented space, again, not a lot of this rational thinking, we hopped on a river we thought was the right one, paddled down it for about 3 or 4 hours to realize that we were going nowhere and we were on the wrong river and had to come back out and make our way back out to the correct river. It was a pain in the butt and could have been saved by taking some more time to just slow down, calm down, and think a bit more clearly. But at the end of the day, we were okay. So, I hope some of these things that we're talking about sort of paint a bit of a clearer picture that when you're getting onto a lake, when you're getting into the backcountry, there are a lot of ways to kind of ensure that you know where you're heading. And there are foolproof ways like compass, like following shorelines, like, knowing the area before, going with somebody who's experienced to kind of show you the ropes, doing the route that you might know a couple of times as a practice route to navigate, challenging yourself in urban settings to just practice your taking bearings, adjusting for declination, all these things that when you come time where you're actually in a situation where you might be up against either getting lost or not knowing where you are, you have skills ready to go in your back pocket. Canoe tripping has inherent uncertainty, but it's really about building as much certainty on the things that you can, coming with a well-packed gear, whatever it is, coming ready to go, so that when something comes up, like a situation where you're lost, you've got these skills in your back pocket ready to operate. That is it on orientation on navigation for right now. We're going to go into weather. There are all kinds of things that can help us predict weather. There are all kinds of clues on the land, in the air, in the sky, in the creatures that help us kind of take some basic guesses when it comes to weather. Clouds, I say forecasts kind of half jokingly because, if anybody's had experience camping, you'll read a forecast the morning of and you'll show up to your campsite and it's something totally different, and they tend to shift daily anyways. So it's a useful clue, I guess, to know, but never trust forecasts too much. Animals, smoke, sun, air, all these things that help us get a feel for what's happening in the sky and know what to expect. Usually, they'll put the caveat there that they're not always guaranteed, but they paint a bit of a broader picture with what's happening. First thing is smoke and air. So a quick note is smoke is rising really well, really easily. Chances are there's a high pressure area in your region, which will indicate fair weather, clear skies for at least the immediate future. If you've got smoke and you've ever had this experience where the smoke is staying really low to the ground, it's kind of compressed and collapsing and curling around, you've got a low pressure in your region, and you could be in store for some stormy weather in the future. Air as well, again, things like humidity. If it's really humid, if you're noticing when you're walking around, you're smelling flowers more, if you're traveling through a bog and you really smell that scent of decomposition because of that humidity in the air, chances are you've got some moisture in the air, and you can expect some weather, probably some bad weather coming in at some point. I wanted to touch on this one. It's not on the list of typical clues, but the old saying, red sky at night, sailor's delight, red sky warning, sailor take warning, is not the case. Red sky at night is not sailor's delight. It is far from it. So as the rotation of the earth causes the prevailing winds that come from the west, and the sun sets in the west, and a red sky indicates a significant cloud bank in that direction, which is the promise of not great weather. So red sky at night actually means not the best weather is on its way. Red sky at morning, you're all good. Again, these clouds are moving away from you, and that's giving it that red hue in the sky, which means that this weather is clearing up, and you probably got a fair weather day ahead of you. So I just thought I'd debunk that one because that was fun to me when I learned it, and it's still a lot of fun to say. We touched on air a little bit, but that whole idea of the calm before the storm. I don't know if you have ever experienced this, but when you're traveling in the backcountry and you can kind of sense there's a storm coming, and right before it's hit, everything kind of seems to go quiet. The birds quiet down. Everything kind of goes still for a moment. And the next thing you know, you're in the middle of a thunderstorm or a rainstorm or God knows what. And there's a reason behind that. It's true because before stormy weather, a low pressure system will actually come in and push out the area's typical wind patterns, making way for this new pressure system to come in. And again, back to this high humidity, general indicator of moisture in the air and that rain is on its way. So taking stock, being aware of if you're smelling things, if you're feeling moisture in the air. You can also look at some of the trees. Often the leaves, their stems will point to just a little bit up when they're a bit more moist. So things to start picking up on. Of course, the best weather indicator are clouds, especially if it's a gray cloud raining on you. Chances are that it's actually raining. I'm not going to go into all the types of clouds like cirrus and cumulonimbus and stratus and all these things because it's a whole world in and of itself. But I will say, as a general rule of thumb, high, white, wispy clouds, those clouds that kind of look almost like just like white strings pulled across the sky, if they're super high, you can assume it'll be good weather. If they're low, thick, and dark clouds, you'll probably have bad weather. Kind of a flat ground of clouds, or like a ceiling of the same level of clouds all the way across will typically indicate that the air is stable and that the weather will be consistent. When you see these different layers of clouds, some clouds down low, some high up, chances are there are two pressure systems moving in together, and you'll have some variable weather coming in. Same thing with fluffy clouds, those really cotton candy pillow looking type clouds. So the air is unstable, and you can expect at some point in the future, again, some kind of weather event, rain, storm, something like that. And the last thing I'll
I
speak
will
to,
add.
sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll add one note on clouds, on cumulus clouds, which are those flat bottomed, fluffy on top kind of clouds. As you were saying, Alexander, a really great thing about clouds is predictability, and knowing that. So one thing I was always taught when I was younger is if you see flat bottom clouds grouped together, for sort of as far as the eye can see, you know that you're going to have consistent weather that you have in that moment for about 2 to 3 hours. Is like a general rule of thumb. So yeah, flat cumulus clouds equals you know what to expect for the next couple hours.
Mm-hmm. Well, and just to add to that, cloud color too is a bit of an indicator. So black clouds, those really, really dark, that just like this ominous feel, indicate that a storm is coming, but it won't likely have strong winds with these black clouds. Brown clouds, storm's coming, and it's gonna have strong winds. You can expect some shaking. White clouds typically mean good weather, but a storm could be imminent. It could be indication of different pressure systems moving in. And gray clouds, you're going to have bad weather, but not for a long time. It won't be sustained, and it won't last around for a while. Well, welcome, Rod. Some other indications you can look at for weather. Things like the animals. Animals are always telling us things if we can actually be present and listen to what they're saying. And some examples of this are birds can sense air pressure as creatures. And I know there's a bird expert on the call who actually has a pet bird with her, so she could probably call me out on this, and I hope you don't, please, Nikki. But birds can sense air pressure. If you see them during a storm, if they're flying around during the storm, chances are that storm is likely going to last for a bit of time. If you see flocks of birds migrating through the sky, chances are the weather is going to be likely fair. They tend to fly a bit lower in the sky when a storm is approaching. So some things to pick up on. Things like frogs, the louder the frog's rivets are, the harder rain you can expect. Turtles are going to head to higher ground when the storm is coming. Snakes, if they're not typically where you'd see them, if snakes aren't typically where you'd see them, chances are they're prepping for a storm as well. Even ants, and a storm's coming, they're going to be building up the walls of their hills. They're going to be building up the signs, making them a bit more stable. So if we have an opportunity to be present to what's happening on the land, we can really predict what's going on because there's so many hints there waiting for us. Which brings the final piece we're going to talk about this evening, which is this idea of enhancing our awareness through different ways. The one that we're going to talk about right now for a bit is this idea of owl eyes. And I'm going to invite everybody, if you are able and willing and have the capacity to right now, in a little activity. We're going to move a little bit. If you're sitting down, you can make it work. If you'd like to stand up, it definitely works well when you're standing. But I'm going to invite you to stick your hands out in front of you and sort of wiggle up your fingers a little bit and just keep your eyes on your fingers as they're wiggling. And as you're wiggling there, start moving your hands out to your side. Just slowly, and keeping them in your visual field. And keep going and keep going and keep going. And pretty much keep wiggling them and spreading them out until such time that you can no longer see them. And then bring them just back into your visual field. Right as soon as you see them, just out of the corners of your eyes, those things wiggling around. You can come back. You can put your arms down now, that's fine. But just giving you a hint here and giving you an introduction to something that we often don't ever realize, or we never really present to. We never really look through these eyes that have this huge peripheral vision. Owls are known for having this ability to turn and have this big wide vision. And humans, we have to some degree the capacity to do that too. But we so often don't do it because we're hyper focused. Our eyes have been trained, especially in recent years, to look at our phones, to keep things right in front of us, to look, ancestrally too, to be able to, if we're hunting a creature or whatever it is, we have to have that good dial-in vision. But we have a bigger capacity to see a lot wider. This is the whole thing that we're talking about in this workshop, is seeing wider, opening up our skills so that all these things we've talked about, navigation, map reading, reading weather, reading clouds, anything, we're going to miss them if we're not actually there to see them. And I want you to consider that for a moment. Just think for a second, what else, as you go about your day, what are you missing when you are so hyper-focused? When you're in nature, what things you see out of the corner of your eye and you miss them? But that corner of the eye is where a lot of things are happening out there. So the invitation there is to really step into that and enhance your visual field by doing this. I'm just seeing, yeah, let's talk about owl slide. Oh, this is this. And in the same way, can we soften our field of vision? So instead of always holding on that super tight space, if we're looking at a shoreline trying to find a portage, if we're just dialing in on one spot only, we might miss the clear sign to our left, to our right. So if we can kind of slow that down a bit and really, again, widen and soften, we're going to see a lot more. Another thing I'll speak to, and this was shared with, this idea was shared to me a while back from an excellent outdoor mentor. His name is Chris Gilmore. He does some really great work. If you haven't heard of him, check him out, Chris Gilmore. He shared this idea that in nature, everything is a track. And in the world, everything is a track. As the world spins, gravity by its very nature wants to flatten everything down. That's how gravity works. It makes things flat. So that anything that's not flat is a track of some sort. A depression in the land is definitely a track of an animal walking through there. But I invite you to kind of open up that point of view to such that a mountain is a track of plate tectonics and things occurring. Rivers are tracks of glacial recede. Buildings are tracks of humans building stuff. If we look at a track as the history of something, the story of something existing on the landscape, there is so much more to learn. You are a track of your parents. This desk is the track of somebody that built it. There's a story waiting for us in every single thing existing in nature. And if we can get present to what's happening out there through things like our owl eyes, through things like softening our field of vision, then I guarantee you the capacity we have to see things and notice things and see the story on the land, like the weather, like the animals, like navigating and not getting lost, is incredibly enhanced. And so as you go about your day this week, as you go about your day tonight, whatever you do, I invite you to take on that context for a moment, to look at things as a track, look at things as if there was a story there waiting to be told, because I guarantee you there is, if we are willing to listen to it. One other piece I'll say too, also shared to me by this mentor, Chris, is, when we're looking at things on the land, when we're trying to figure out features and notice what's happening in the forest, we often look at the things in our way. So if we're looking at a forest, we'll look at the trees, because those are the things that consist of the forest. And I would invite you to flip that on its head and instead look at the space between the trees. If you're looking for animals to see what they're doing, I guarantee you they're not hiding in plain sight. They're hiding in those nooks and crannies that you don't typically look at because you're so focused on the big things catching your eye. So as you travel through the woods, as you travel through your day, travel anywhere, start noticing that there is a lot happening in the things that we don't look at. So look in the space between the trees. The last thing I'll say for any of this, for developing your owl eyes, for learning how compasses work, for practicing your declination, for reading a map, for understanding animals, any of these things, it takes practice. For anything in the backcountry, it takes time, it takes experience, and it takes a bit of guidance. Everything that Aaron and I have learned over the years has been from people being willing to share knowledge. It's been from, even on these chats, on these calls, we have people bringing ideas to us that we didn't know. Practice, 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 and be curious. Ask people what they know. Ask people what they know about clouds, about animal practices, about weather, about reading a map. Because I said at the beginning of this call, the more that you know, the more that you have in your back pockets, when things inherently come up, when you see a tree, when you see an animal or a track or a cloud or you're lost. It's the things that you wish you knew that could help you out. And if you take the time when you're at home, when you have the capacity, and you have access to things, especially these days, we're all back in lockdown right now. If you have access to workshops, there's so much free gold online right now of people just pouring out their knowledge because there are people waiting to listen. Books, internet, whatever it is, practice, 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 practice. I guarantee you, you will not be upset that you did. And I think with that brings us to the end of this presentation. We'll just finish this piece by extending a lot of gratitude to everybody for coming out this evening, for taking some time this Wednesday night after we've all been on so much Zoom lately, staring at screens. What a pain in the butt it can be. And I think what more fun it can be when we're learning about things that are prepping us and priming us for a lot of fun outside. So thank you all so much. It's been a treat to talk. It's been a treat for you to listen. I appreciate your ears. I appreciate your eyes. I appreciate your willingness to learn. And with that, we'll open the floor for any questions. We'll check the chat. If you have a question, feel free to use the raise hand function on participants. We can call on you. If there's something that you think we missed, please share that as well. And I will complete there and maybe hand it off to you, Aaron, if you have anything you want to add there as well.
That was great. Thank you. I think a lot of what we talk about, and if you've been at our other workshops, really comes back to a level of self-awareness with everything that you're doing, right? In the literal sense, and in the theoretical sense as well. And this is certainly no different, right? Navigation and being prepared for weather, having that level of knowledge and being aware of that level of knowledge is incredibly important, right? And what does that mean in practice? Well, that maybe means, not going to unmaintained Temagami for your first ever backcountry trip, where there are in some areas not a ton of signed portage. The folks at Friends of Temagami and PJ are doing an amazing job at trying to fix that. But there are plenty of areas that are not, right? Perhaps visit a spot like Algonquin in a bit more of a popular route that has really well maintained portage and campsite signs, right? I'll also say a note about rain and about being prepared. And I wrote this little note down while we were talking. Rain's not such a bad thing. Not having a tarp is a bad thing. And not knowing how to hang that tarp is an even worse thing. So to Alexandra's point before about practice, these are all important things in being able to read the weather. But, if you know that it's going to rain or it is raining, it's not the end of the world. It really isn't. I mean, it can be if it's thunder and you're in the middle of the lake, and that can be dangerous, and handle that situation appropriately. But try and embrace every part of it as best you can, because rain can be a lot of fun sometimes. And just have the skills as best you can, and your time spent out there will be that much more enjoyable. We're always available and accessible also to any other questions that you might have. If you want to shoot us an email and you want to know what's the best knot to hang my tarp, if I've got gloves on and it's cold, we are happy to talk about that all the time. So we're always around to have those conversations.
Rock and roll. Well, I haven't seen any questions come in on the chat, so I will thank you all again. And if you have anything, please do reach out. There are some resources available on our site as well at tripshed.ca. There's a free guidebook there you can access and contact us through there. It's been a blast. We are doing these every Wednesday. Claire, every Wednesday night we'll be having topics come up. So keep your eyes peeled either online on our Instagram or on Facebook or on our website for the next sessions, covering some interesting topics, camping with kids, taking some deeper cuts into some broader contexts around overnight camping and backcountry tripping. We're getting a gentleman coming in shortly from Algonquin Park named Ryan, who's going to be doing a really great botany and plant ID workshop. So good stuff on the horizon as always, although it might seem a bit wet and rainy these days with what's going on. Keep in mind that there is places to explore, things to learn, woods to wander in. So come on out. And yes, Lee, they are going to be recorded. We will send this out to everybody as soon as possible and get this out. There is a YouTube channel as well, I think, running, which is a first for us. But the first two workshops, Backcountry Cooking and the Introduction to Canoe Trip Planning, are accessible on YouTube. Just search the trip shed and they'll be there. So check them out there. And yeah, Bones, we'll see you next week. Have an awesome rest of the night, folks. And we will see you out on the trail, I hope.
Thanks, everyone.
Now, if this one just closed, that would be good.